Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, hipsters. And thank you for joining us in podcast land. Today, we're going to focus on the war side of things, from the Europe all the way to Ukraine and Russia, and how it is affecting, or how America is coping with NATO and Germany and their big input on this war scenario. I'm Vessel 1, and with me Vessel 2. Vessel 2, how are you this day?
All is well in the kingdom. War is the hot topic, and it seems like the European nations are back at it again. The ex-Soviet Union is back at it again. I don't know if this is going to end peacefully, but according to the articles we break down for you today, it seems like the rumors of war are spreading.
Okay, and with that, let's get into it.
Hidden in plain sight.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. What's in your community, locally and globally? I'm Vessel 1, and with me, Vessel 2.
Hey, quick question.
Is it hidden in plain sight?
Vessel 1, Vessel 2.
Talks about hidden in plain sight.
Wake up.
Hidden in plain sight.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society.
Let us fight for a world of reason, a world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness.
Please stay tuned.
U.S. military running a massive undercover army and conducting warrantless surveillance of Americans. Two reports over the past week have revealed that the Pentagon is carrying out secret operations within the U.S. and internationally without congressional oversight and in violation of basic constitutional rights. An exclusive report by Newsweek on Monday explained that the U.S. military is operating the largest undercover force the world has ever known. The secret army of 60,000 people works under masked identities and in low profile, and is part of a special program called Signature Reduction. The Newsweek report, written by journalist William M. Arkin following a 2-year investigation of the program, says that the secret military force is more than 10 times the size of the clandestine elements of the CIA. Carries out domestic and foreign assignments both in military uniforms and under civilian cover, in real life and online, sometimes hiding in private businesses and consultancies. Some of them household name companies. Arkin examined over 600 resumes and 1,000 job postings, dozens of Freedom of Information Act requests, and scores of interviews with participants and defense decision-makers to uncover the completely unregulated practice of the U.S. military. The giant clandestine operation has never been the subject of a hearing in Congress, and Arkin says that it challenges U.S. laws, the Geneva Conventions, the Code of Military Conduct, and basic accountability. The infrastructure of the Pentagon's covert signature reduction program is based upon 130 private companies with the support of dozens of little-known and secret government organizations that award classified contracts and oversee publicly acknowledged operations. Among the functions of these private businesses are creating false documentation, paying the taxes of individuals operating under assumed identities, manufacturing disguises and other devices used to avoid identification, building invisible devices used to photograph and listen in on the conversations and activity of people around the world. Over half of the Signature Reduction Army is made up of Special Operations Forces who Arkin says pursue terrorists in war zones from Pakistan to West Africa, but also increasingly work in unacknowledged hot spots, including behind enemy lines in places like North Korea and Iran. The second largest group is made up of military intelligence specialists, collectors, counterintelligence agents, even linguists who are deployed with assumed names in order to conceal their true identities. Arkin explains that the secret force has been built up over the past decade and is in part a response to the growth of cyber warfare internationally. He writes that the fastest growing group within the secret army are those who never leave their keyboard. These are the cutting-edge cyber fighters and intelligence collectors who assume false personas online, employing non-attribution and misattribution techniques to hide the who and the where of their online presence while they search for high-value targets and collect what is called publicly accessible information, or even engage in campaigns to influence and manipulate social media. Although it is well known that the U.S. military intelligence apparatus is responsible for the transmission of the greatest number, most invasive and most deadly malware and spyware of any country in the world. The Newsweek journalist and editors expressed surprise that the Pentagon operation has led to thousands of spies who carry out their day-to-day work in various made-up personas. The very type of nefarious operations the United States decries when Russian and Chinese spies do the same. A former military officer who oversaw super-secret special access programs of the signature reduction operations spoke to Newsweek on condition of anonymity. The officer said that no one is fully aware of the extent of the program, nor has much consideration been given to the implications for the military institution. He added, everything from the status of the Geneva Conventions, where a soldier operating under false identity to be captured by an enemy, to congressional oversight is problematic. The Newsweek report includes details about the activities of several individuals in the signature reduction operations, most of which involves providing fake identity materials and methods for preventing their cover from being blown. Other details are regarding the electronic eavesdropping techniques, such as placing secret listening devices into everyday objects used to monitor the activities and communications of individuals both inside and outside the U.S. The fact that the Pentagon has been conducting warrantless surveillance of Americans was exposed in a May 13 letter from Senator Ron Wyden, Democrat from Oregon, to Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin that was published by Vice's Motherboard Tech. Wyden asked the Department of Defense for detailed information about its data purchasing practices after Motherboard revealed Special Forces were buying location data last February. The initial responses, which revealed that the military or intelligence agencies were using internet browsing and other types of data, prompted Wyden to demand more answers about warrantless spying on American citizens. Wyden wrote that his investigation had confirmed that the Internal Revenue Service, Customs and Border Protection, the Drug Enforcement Agency and the Defense Intelligence Agency were all purchasing from private companies the location data of Americans without a warrant. The Oregon senator also wrote that he had requested answers to his questions in February and that the DOD responded to the first group of questions in March and then the remaining questions in April. Among Wyden's questions was for the DOD to explain its legal position with regard to the DIA's argument that the Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable searches and seizures do not apply to data about Americans that the government buys, and only apply to data that the government acquires via compulsion. In typical evasive language, the DOD responded that each of its intelligence departments is responsible for ensuring that intelligence activities are carried out in accordance with existing law, including the Fourth Amendment as understood through the Carpenter opinion of the Supreme Court and other relevant case law, regulation, and policy. In this case, DIA's Office of General Counsel provided the legal support for the DIA activity. Wyden explained in his letter that 4 of the responses by the DOD were designated controlled and classified information and another was labeled classified. These questions deal with specifics about which agencies are using purchased location data and Internet metadata, including NetFlow and Domain Name System (DNS) records in communications where both ends are within the U.S. and communications where one end is within the U.S. and the other is outside the U.S. Wyden has requested that the responses to these questions be released to the public by June 15.
Our government is surveilling us, and they're using big tech to do it. And I'm pretty sure that most people using Alexa are falling victim to that. And the internet is not your friend. And at the same time, they're trying to push gun laws to restrict people from buying guns. But if you got people coming into your house unannounced in the middle of the night, and you can't protect yourself, then that means they can just round you up without any warrants. So how would you prevent a rogue cop from entering your home and just doing with you as they please?
Yeah, that's the question that is at hand. But all this, it seems like it's another return of what's been done previously before. And Snowden, he put it out there almost about 10 years, and he said that that's what they were doing, and they had devices, and they using the internet and whatnot to spy on the people of America and the world. And it's, they will continue to do so as long as the people not challenge them or pushing them to back down or to stop it. Just like last week in our episode with John Perkins, the same thing goes. These are tactics that the government are using to control and manipulate the society of America. Again, like Bob Marley said, the government is wicked, and this article here just proves it.
Yeah, and on top of that, you have the Patriot Act that came out that made all pretty much veterans domestic terrorists.
That's it, yeah.
I'd say if you haven't got your arms, you need to get your arms, make sure you're trained to use them, make sure you got enough ammunition on deck, make sure your ammunition is kept in magazines ready to go.
There you go.
Other news in America.
U.S. Supreme Court abolishes constitutional right to abortion. On Friday, at the stroke of a pen, 6 unelected judges ended the right to abortion, dramatically altering the country's legal and social landscape. For the first time in American history, the Supreme Court eliminated a fundamental constitutional right broadly recognized and supported by the overwhelming majority of the country's population. The 6-3 decision in Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization is effective immediately. Abortion is now or will imminently become illegal in at least 21 states with a combined population of 135 million people. For the vast majority of working women, travel to the mostly coastal states where abortion remains legal will not be an option. This is the new reality. Many will die in botched back-alley operations. Doctors who perform abortions or prescribe medication to terminate pregnancies will be sent to prison. There is often no exception to abortion bans in cases where the individual is a child or was impregnated through rape or incest. The decision is the opening salvo in an historically unprecedented attack by the ruling class on all democratic rights. The concurring opinion by Clarence Thomas announces that the court will now begin to revisit all prior cases in which the Supreme Court protected the substantive due process rights of the population. In future cases, Thomas wrote, we should reconsider all of this court's substantive due process precedents, including Griswold, Lawrence, and Obergefell. These decisions, respectively, protected the right to contraceptives, overturned laws criminalizing sodomy, and legalized same-sex marriage. Though these decisions are first on the chopping block, Thomas's concurrence makes clear they are just the starting point. After overruling these demonstrably erroneous decisions, the question would remain whether other constitutional provisions guarantee the myriad rights that our substantive due process cases have generated, he wrote. Such cases include Brown v. Board of Education, barring school segregation, Gideon v. Wainwright, establishing the right to free criminal defense counsel, Loving v. Virginia, banning laws against interracial marriage, West Coast Hotel Company v. Parrish, upholding minimum wage and child labor restrictions, and many more. The day before issuing its decision in Dobbs, the court issued a separate decision drastically scaling back protections against police violating the rights of those under arrest. The decision is not legally legitimate. It is part of a far-right political conspiracy. It is the latest in a long train of reactionary decisions legitimizing state surveillance, police violence, mass deportations, and corporate domination of the electoral system. It was issued by a court that does not constitute a democratic branch of government but a battering ram for medieval clericalism and bigotry. The court is now dominated by fascistic ideologues. 3 of the justices voting with the majority in Dobbs, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Coney Barrett, were appointed by Donald Trump. the would-be dictator who conspired with two of the justices, Alito and Thomas, to orchestrate a coup attempt on January 6, 2021, seeking to overturn the results of the 2020 election and establish a dictatorship. Dobbs is the judicial continuation of Trump's coup attempt. It is being wildly celebrated by the far right across the country, which views it as a testament to their power and prospects for the future. Trump issued a pious statement declaring that God made the decision. In Texas, pro-Trump State Attorney General Ken Paxton declared June 24 a holiday and closed state offices in honor of the nearly 70 million unborn babies killed in the womb since 1973, the year of Roe v. Wade. The Republican Party will press forward in the fight to abolish abortion even in those states where it remains legal. Fascist Congresswoman and January 6 co-conspirator Marjorie Taylor Greene declared, "We are one step closer to ending the mass genocide of abortion in America," but warned that it's not totally over. Former Vice President Mike Pence said, "We must not rest and must not relent until the sanctity of life is restored to the center of American law in every state in the land." The response of the Democratic Party confirms beyond a shadow of a doubt that the defense of even the most basic democratic rights is impossible through the framework of capitalist two-party politics. At a press conference Friday, Democratic House Speaker Nancy Pelosi read a poem and solemnly said, "We hope that the Supreme Court will open its eyes." House Democrats gathered on the steps of the Capitol building and sang "God Bless America" as protesters chanted in the background. President Joe Biden stumbled through a perfunctory 11-minute speech in which he called the decision sad and urged Congress to restore protections of Roe v. Wade as federal law, which everyone knows will never happen. Biden did not announce that the Democratic Party would use the last months of its House and Senate majority to overturn the filibuster, appoint additional Supreme Court justices, or initiate impeachment proceedings against Clarence Thomas for his role in Trump's coup. Instead, Biden absolved himself of any responsibility, declaring that no action of the president can protect abortion. After admitting that the Democratic Party will do nothing to legally protect abortion on a federal level, he then urged people to vote for Democrats in the upcoming midterm elections. Biden also gave voice to the Democratic Party's primary concern that mass opposition to the decision may produce a social explosion and warned protesters not to intimidate the far right. "Keep all protests peaceful. No intimidation. Violence is never acceptable. Threats and intimidation are not speech." As Biden spoke, a phalanx of Capitol Police deployed to respond to a protest that had broken out at the Supreme Court building. In marked contrast with January 6, 2021, the police were wearing full riot gear and there were snipers deployed on the courthouse roof. The day before the Supreme Court ruling, as the fifth day of hearings took place showing the Republican Party was fully engaged in Trump's coup plot on January 6. Biden referred to the Republican Party during a press conference as "my Republican friends." In the same remarks, Biden blamed Russian President Vladimir Putin for rising gas prices and defended the massive armament of Ukraine as necessary to spread democracy and combat Putin's murderous ways. Biden and the Democrats rely on their Republican friends to wage U.S. imperialism's neo-colonial war against Russia, which aims to open up Eastern Europe and all of Eurasia to the unbridled domination of American corporations, risking nuclear war. But this bipartisanship legitimizes the extreme right, provides wind in the sails of an increasingly fascist Republican Party, and paves the way for the Supreme Court's rampage on democratic rights. The Dobbs decision has the character of a Civil War ruling, akin to the Supreme Court's 1857 decision in Sanford v. Dred Scott, which hastened the outbreak of the American Civil War of 1861–65 by ruling that Southern slaves remained private property when taken to Northern free states, and that all individuals of African descent had no rights because they were not citizens. Today, Biden is playing the role of then Democratic President James Buchanan, who was inaugurated 2 days before Dred Scott was issued and whose administration was defined by his efforts to conciliate his slaveholding friends in the doomed reactionary belief that accommodation with the right would preserve the Union. Dred Scott shocked the Northern population and contributed to a growing realization that democracy was incompatible with the peculiar institution of slavery, which allowed a tiny slaveholding elite to dominate the laws of the entire country. The conflict over slavery came to be seen as irrepressible, and the question was resolved through the Revolutionary War for emancipation. Today, millions are coming to similar conclusions about capitalism, in which a handful of reactionary oligarchs dominate the political system, attempt to establish dictatorship, wage war with potentially catastrophic consequences, allow the deaths of millions through the preventable spread of diseases like SARS-CoV-2, destroy the environment for profit, and oversee the expansion of massive levels of social inequality and poverty. The Dobbs decision shows that the defense of basic democratic rights today is entirely dependent on the development of a mass movement of the working class independent of the rotten two-party system. Such a movement is developing in the United States and internationally, spurred by the rising cost of living, which is driving millions into deeper levels of economic hardship. To defend democracy and stop imperialist war, this movement must have as its goal the abolition of the capitalist system. This means the seizure and redistribution of the financial aristocracy's wealth and the socialist transformation of the world economic system to meet the needs of the international working class.
So, there you have it. I believe WSWS.org is out of Australia. That article had a lot of information in it, and they were bouncing all over the place. But they did point out that capitalism and the two-party system is not our friend.
No, it was kind of unique that they used the Dobbs and the Dred Scott incident to clarify how things are in America. You know, if you know anything about the history, Dred Scott was actually a very prolific person who, as they say, worked like a slave to become the master. He was able to get his family and himself out of servitude and somewhat become a free man. And they was shocked how he did it, but it was a long, extensive battle. He went to several courts to actually get to that point. And there was a time that they wasn't sure if he was able to do so. And the owner, or so-called his slave master, as the story goes, after he died, had some transcripts or had written somewhat of a will to release him of his servitude. But that in itself is just basically showing how the government somewhat have you all in red tape, trying to do what's supposedly is your free right to do in America. That's just my little input on it. Anything further, Vessel 2?
Yeah, America's from creation was about property, control, and dominance.
There you go.
Period. I mean, there's no other way to look at it if you are privy to the history books, and they wrote the history books. So to say that what they wrote was braggadocious could be taken one way, but they wrote it. So if you are an American and you went to the public school system, we pretty much read all the same history books. There's no denying that the government has never been friend to everybody. And for them to cover so much in that last article was telling, because a lot was told.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. America seems to be the next empire to fall, and they are doing everything that they can to stay in power. And by they, I am saying the European Americans who are in control of everything. But under that category, there is a fraction, and they're pointing the fingers at each other, where you have the
That's right.
European, and then you have the small hats, the Old Testament, which they don't necessarily claim to be white, as you would say, but that's who is in control, and that's who have pretty much led the country to where we're at now.
It's demise, so don't. Yeah, totally in concurrence.
And the next article is interesting in regards of it's speaking about the Germans, and after World War II, it seems like a lot of the Germans made it to America, and they were given high-ranked positions in government.
Especially after World War II.
Right?
That's correct.
Let's see what this article says. German Air Force. What are they talking about?
German Air Force chief calls for the use of nuclear weapons against Russia. While the NATO powers are escalating the proxy war in Ukraine against Russia, the German Armed Forces Bundeswehr is threatening Moscow with the use of nuclear weapons. According to a report in the Bild newspaper, the Air Force head Ingo Gerhardt stated at the Kiel International Sea Power Symposium on Friday, for credible deterrence, "We need both the means and the political will to implement nuclear deterrence if necessary." According to the newspaper, he added threateningly, "Putin, don't mess with us." By 2030, Europeans will have 600 modern fighter jets in the Baltic Sea region. Then there are the Americans' planes. The fact that a German general is openly threatening to use nuclear weapons against Russia must be taken as a serious warning. 77 years after the fall of the Third Reich, a fascist mentality is once again spreading in the ruling class. It is ready to commit the worst crimes once again in order to assert its imperialist interests. The Wehrmacht's war of annihilation against the Soviet Union, which began 81 years ago today and in which the Luftwaffe under its then leader Hermann Göring played a central role, resulted in the death of about 30 million Soviet citizens. A comprehensive nuclear war with Russia would not only turn Europe into a nuclear desert, but it would also call into question the survival of all humanity. Figures like Gerhardt's are apparently totally unmoved by such a scenario. In a recent interview on the official YouTube channel of the German Armed Forces, he defended the proxy war being waged by Germany and the other leading NATO powers against Russia, which increasingly directly raises the threat of a nuclear war. The general began by celebrating the successes of the Ukrainian Air Force against Russia, admired the courage and bravery with which it acts there. The country has repeatedly succeeded in occasionally shooting down Russian planes and helicopters. German help played a central role in this. For example, Ukraine was supplied with Stinger missiles to combat enemy aircraft, and these have even shot down one or the other combat aircraft and also helicopters. Now the support has to go even further. The Luftwaffe will supply the Iris TSLM system and thus a rocket that we have developed for the Eurofighter to shoot down enemy aircraft and helicopters, he continued. Gerhardt leaves no doubt that the German military is de facto already at war with Russia. In an interview, he praised the rapid advance of the German Air Force in Eastern Europe. After the Russian forces invaded Ukraine, the Air Force was the first to move its Eurofighters to Romania, he said. They have shown what the Air Force has to show, that we are fast. The Patriot missile defense systems already rolled into Slovakia 1 week after the invasion. The general made clear that the Bundeswehr is preparing for a comprehensive military confrontation behind the backs of the population. Among other things, he called for the rapid procurement of a national missile defense system. This is now urgently also a gap that we must close, in order to be able to intercept and destroy ballistic missiles in space. He proposed to politicians the acquisition of the U.S. Israeli Arrow 3" system, he explained. Gerhardt is particularly proud of the prompt acquisition of the U.S. F-35 fighter jets, which were funded from the €100 billion Bundeswehr Special Fund. He said he was glad that we were able to achieve this in this government and that we will now move forward very quickly. The F-35 were the most modern system at present and enabled the Air Force to act strongly against the Russian armed forces. Against Putin, in the alliance. What this acting in an alliance precisely means in an emergency is regulated by the NATO concept of so-called nuclear participation. In the event of a nuclear war against Russia, German combat aircraft would be armed with U.S. nuclear bombs stored in Germany and would also use them. According to an article on the official website of the Ministry of Defense, the possible arming of the F-35 includes free-falling nuclear weapons. Gerhardt's nuclear threats against Russia are not simply the testimony of a mad general but are consistent with the logic of war. With the systematic military encirclement of Russia by NATO, the imperialist powers, especially Germany and the US, provoked Putin's reactionary attack on Ukraine. Above all, they are now responding to the deep economic crisis and the growing opposition of the working class with a further escalation of war, which literally provokes the use of nuclear weapons. Above all, the ruling class in Germany is striking out more and more recklessly and sees war as an opportunity to return to an aggressive foreign and great power policy after their monstrous crimes in 2 world wars. In a keynote speech at a conference of the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung yesterday, Lars Klingbeil, co-leader of the SPD, stated that, after almost 80 years of restraint, Germany now has a new role in the global coordinate system. Germany is increasingly at the center, and must have the ambition to be a leadership power. Klingbeil explicitly understands this to mean the use of military weapons. For me, a peace policy also means seeing military force as a legitimate means of politics, he stated. He praised the special assets of the Bundeswehr. The decision of Federal Chancellor Olaf Scholz, SPD, to deploy more German troops on NATO's eastern flank and demanded that Europe be given more weight as a geopolitical actor. This is the only way to survive in the coming years in the international competition for relationships, dependencies, connections, cooperation and projection, that is, the imperialist redivision of the world. The costs of this megalomaniac policy are to be passed on to the working class. This new role as a leading power will demand tough decisions from Germany, including financial and political decisions, he threatened. One must change structures, also renegotiate budgets. The ruling class knows that the policy of war abroad, as in the past, requires the militarization of society and the establishment of a dictatorship at home. He wants we as a society to develop a new normality with the Bundeswehr. That we develop a self-evident way of paying respect and recognition to those who do their service for our country, who are willing to go to extremes if Parliament so decides. The warmongers in the media underscored that there are no more moral boundaries for these extremes. Earlier this week, Der Spiegel editor Dirk Kerbjuweit published an article directly calling for German nuclear weapons. Kerbjuweit cynically explains that only a functioning nuclear deterrent can prevent great wars. This would include a debate that is not yet underway. If Europe cannot rely 100% on the United States, if Germany cannot rely 100% on France and Britain, does Germany not also need nuclear weapons? He said that when he wrote these words, it sent chills down his spine. But if you think through all that is currently happening, he continued, you have to ask yourself this question. The fact that the call for German nuclear weapons is raised by Kerbjuweit of all people sheds light on the new era of foreign policy that has been proclaimed. In reality, the new era was prepared over a lengthy period of time. It was Kerbjuweit, just a few days after representatives of the federal government announced the end of military restraint at the 2014 Munich Security Conference, published the notorious article, The Transformation of the Past, in Der Spiegel. Kerbjuweit attacked the historian Fritz Fischer, who had proved in his 1961 book Griff nach der Weltmacht, Grab for World Power, that the German Empire had a large share of responsibility in the outbreak of the First World War. Fischer's theses are basically scandalous. He quoted the now emeritus Humboldt professor Herfried Münkler. With regard to the German crimes in the Second World War, Kerbjuweit gave the Nazi apologist Ernst Nolte, who died in 2016, a platform. Nolte had already claimed in the historians' dispute in the 1980s that the Holocaust was a justified reaction against the Soviet Union. Curb White quoted the Berlin historian Georg Baberowski, a declared follower of Nolte, as saying, "Hitler was not a psychopath, and he wasn't vicious. He did not want to talk about the extermination of the Jews at his table." 8 years have passed since these repugnant statements, and all the warnings of the Socialist Equality Party and its youth organization, the IYSSE, at the time have been dramatically confirmed. The relativization of the historical crimes of German imperialism serves to prepare new wars and new crimes. It is high time to draw the necessary conclusions and join the struggle for a powerful socialist anti-war movement of the international working class.
German Air Force, back at it again. That's a one. How say you?
When it comes to the Germans, they should have no say-so with anything dealing with weaponry after the mass hysteria that they caused back in World War II. And for them to just even mention nuclear arms is a no-no. You know, regardless of what they're saying that they're trying to defend or whatever. But yeah, this is their biggest attribute in essence is their technology that they have been given to the United States, or or the United Organization, or what we call infrastructure, or the business plan of America. Their fight with Russia is, for me, seems like it's all staged, and it's a political way for the elites or so to make money off of it. You know how it goes. What say you, Vessel 2?
Yeah, all wars are banker wars, but
Yeah.
the Germans, as the article stated, they were heavily involved in World War I and World War II. So
That's right.
it just seems to me that they are from the Western world, and according to the numbers, I think they're like the Europeans in general are less than 5% of the world population, meaning that majority of the world's population is heavily melanated to lightly melanated, and there's no other countries or no other continents. Well, Europe is not even a continent, but there's no other group nationality-wise who has done more destruction to the planet and to other nations than the Europeans. So for them to beat on their chest like King Kong after they say 81 years of being silent,
Yeah.
it doesn't really surprise me. I mean, it's going to take a lot of non-European people to wake up and realize the situation, and to unite, put it like that. Uncle Marley said, we have to unite. So that's what we need to do to stop this madness.
Fully in concurrence. Can't go wrong with that. Peace is the way to go. And by unifying and trying to overcome this global obsession of war and violence, yeah, that's it. All right. Well, what's next?
We got more German shenanigans. They're still threatening in another article going to war with Russia. Let's see what they're talking about.
81 years after the War of Annihilation, German Chancellor Scholz makes new war threats against Russia. 81 years ago, on June 22, 1941, the German Wehrmacht invaded the Soviet Union. Almost 30 million Soviet citizens were killed in the course of the war. These were the worst crimes in the history of mankind, culminating in the industrial extermination of European Jewry. The War of Annihilation was long planned by the Nazis and pursued definite political goals. Germany's ruling class was concerned with living space in the East, the enormous raw materials of the Soviet Union, and the pursuit of world power. At the same time, it waged a war of racist ideology aimed at the annihilation of Bolshevism and the extermination of the Jewish people. The crimes are almost indescribable. Millions of people were killed industrially in the gas chambers of the extermination camps. The Nazi regime's war consisted of an unending orgy of extermination. Entire towns and villages were razed to the ground and their inhabitants murdered. One of the worst massacres took place on 29 and 30 September 1941 in Ukraine. Within 2 days, a special commando unit shot 33,771 Jews, men, women and children, in the Babi Yar ravine near Kiev. In his government statement on June 22, the Social Democratic German Chancellor Olaf Scholz did not mention the anniversary and the German crimes at all. The reason for this is as simple as it is threatening. 77 years after the fall of the Third Reich, the ruling class is once again pursuing a course that, apart from the aggressive anti-Semitism of the Nazis, is in the tradition of the German bourgeoisie's old imperialist great power and war politics. On the day before Scholz's speech, SPD co-leader Lars Klingbeil declared this openly in an external political keynote speech. Germany is, after almost 80 years of restraint, again in the center, and must have the ambition of being a leading power, he declared on behalf of the entire ruling class. This also means waging war. Military violence is the legitimate means of politics, he stated. In his speech, Scholz made it clear what this means. He began his remarks by hailing the German Army Bundeswehr Special Fund, which this House passed by an overwhelming majority at the beginning of the month. The rearmament fund in the amount of €100 billion is part of the largest German rearmament offensive since the end of the Second World War. We will equip the Bundeswehr in such a way that it can effectively defend our country and our alliance partners against all attacks, Scholz explained. This is the standard for the new Bundeswehr. With this, we finally provide our soldiers the support they deserve for their important service for our country. For this, he said, hopefully on behalf of all of us here, thank you. As in the First and Second World Wars, under the guise of self-defense, and today the alleged struggle for human rights and democracy, German imperialism is pushing eastwards and massing troops against Russia. Don't stop at words, explained Scholz. Immediately after the beginning of the war, the Chancellor means Putin's reactionary invasion of Ukraine provoked by the decades-long NATO offensive against Russia, Germany transferred additional soldiers and military capabilities. For example, for air defense to the Eastern Alliance area, with the Lithuanian President Gitanas Nausėda, Scholz agreed that we would strengthen the German presence there permanently and assign Lithuania a robust Bundeswehr brigade. In addition, presence with air and naval forces in the Baltic Sea region will be expanded, he said. Soldiers will be sent to Slovakia and Slovakia will be supported in securing its airspace. Scholz's speech was characterized by the yearning for great power status and war enthusiasm of the first half of the 20th century. In the greatest security crisis in Europe for decades, he boasted, Germany, the most economically powerful and populous country in the European Union, has a very special responsibility, not only for its own security, but also for the security of its allies. During his visit to the Baltic 2 weeks ago, he made clear, an attack on you would be an attack on all of us. We will defend every square meter of the alliance area, Scholz added. Scholz chose not to go into more detail about what this statement means. Should the Ukraine war expand to an Eastern European NATO country, which it is increasingly threatening to do with the blockade Russia's Kaliningrad exclave by Lithuania, the Chancellor is committing Germany to go to war again against Russia. The consequence would be a third world war fought with nuclear weapons which could kill hundreds of millions of people and destroy the entire planet. Scholz claimed that Germany would continue to support Ukraine, without NATO itself becoming a war party. This is outright deception. The entire speech of the Chancellor made it clear that the ruling class is already in a military conflict with Russia and that it is constantly escalating, with all the attendant consequences. The Chancellor then proudly documented the German arms deliveries to Kiev, which increasingly take the form of direct military intervention. The training of Ukrainian soldiers on the Cheetah flak tanks is ongoing. It will begin in the coming days with the promised multiple rocket launchers. The agreement on the Iris-T air defense system, which protects an entire city from hostile airstrikes, was signed a few days ago between Ukraine and our industry. A first circular swap of weapons with the Czech Republic is complete. We are very keen to have discussions with other swap partners. In addition, he revealed, the self-propelled howitzers, on which we have intensively trained Ukrainian soldiers in recent weeks, are now on the ground in Ukraine. Ukraine would be given the weapons it especially needs at this stage of the war. Scholz spoke with the Ukrainian president precisely about this issue. Germany will deliver them today and in the future, as long as Ukraine needs our support. The declared goal is the military defeat of Russia. We are far, far away from negotiations between Ukraine and Russia, because Putin still believes in the possibility of a dictated peace, Scholz explained. It is all the more crucial that we keep our course steadfast with our sanctions, with internationally coordinated arms deliveries and with our financial support for Ukraine. For this, you need a lot of staying power. In fact, the German war aims go beyond Ukraine and Russia. Scholz left no doubt that the ruling class sees the ongoing EU summit in Brussels, the G7 summit in Elmau in southern Bavaria at the beginning of next week, and the subsequent NATO summit in Madrid as another opportunity to increase German influence in Europe and internationally, and to advance its own imperialist interests. Germany has set the course, invested massively in our security, and thereby solved the promise of German security responsibility for Europe, explained Scholz, and added threateningly, at the international summits in the coming days, we will initiate similar profound changes. The European Union must commit itself to the European future of its neighborhood and to the necessary internal reforms. Workers and young people across the continent must see this as a warning. The ruling class intends to continue its war offensive with unrelenting brutality and to squeeze the gigantic costs of the rearmament out of the working class again, through social spending cuts, attacks on jobs and wages, massive price increases, and the fueling of inflation. On the day of Scholz's speech, Free Democratic Party Finance Minister Christian Lindner informed the population, in the style of the old Nazi motto, guns instead of butter, to expect 3 to 4, maybe 5 years of scarcity. The German parliament Bundestag debate made it clear that all Bundestag parties support this essentially fascist course. When there was criticism of Scholz and the traffic light coalition, it came from the right. Opposition leader and chairman of the Christian Democratic Union, Christian Social Union Group, Friedrich Merz, expressly welcomed the delivery of heavy weapons to Ukraine but wished it had taken place earlier. The leader of the Left Party, Dietmar Bartsch, also complained about not properly enforced sanctions, and signaled his support for the new German great power policy. I agree with the responsibility, I agree very much. Germany should take responsibility, and gladly more, he said to the applause of his parliamentary group. The Socialist Equality Party, SGP, is the only party that opposes the great power policies and gives a voice and perspective to the massive opposition to militarism in war. Workers and young people must respond to the new era of foreign policy by building an anti-war movement of the international working class whose aim is to eliminate the cause of militarism in war, the capitalist profit system, and to build a global socialist society. This is the only way to avert a relapse into barbarism.
Germany's off its rockers, boy.
Yeah, those guys need to be really checked on the way they act.
Well, you know how it is. All right, let's see what NATO says. We got about, 6 minutes?
The war has pushed NATO leaders to reshape their strategy. They're preparing for a summit later this week in Madrid that they say will be transformative.
Our new concept will guide us in an era of strategic competition. I expect it will make clear that allies consider Russia as the most significant and direct threat to our security.
Stoltenberg says they're finalizing the details of their new strategic concept. They'll sign a document in Madrid that will guide them for the next 10 years. Stoltenberg says the agreement will no longer describe Russia as a strategic partner. And he says they'll transform the NATO response force from 40,000 personnel to well over 300,000. Stoltenberg says for the first time, the document will address security challenges posed by China. And for the first time, NATO leaders have invited the heads of Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand to join the talks. Stoltenberg hopes to make progress on expanding the alliance to include Finland and Sweden. But Turkish leaders have rejected the idea. Stoltenberg says he'll meet with the leaders of all three countries before the summit.
That wraps up the war. Interesting. I'm not really sure if we're going to come to nukes being dropped, but I don't expect nothing less coming out of Europe. They've been warring since their foundation. So I just hope either they just take each other all out as fast as possible so we can pick up the pieces once they do so, or stop with the foolishness. What say you, Vessel One?
Everything you said was totally what I'm thinking. So let's see where the chips may fall. And there we have it. We've been all around the world and back again, and it seemed like the same story, just a different year. I'm Vessel One, signing out with Vessel Two. And Vessel Two, can you give us your final thoughts?
Yeah, final thoughts for this segment. With the rumors of war spreading, some countries have taken away people's rights to carry arms to protect themselves for this very situation where tyrannical governments come in and just do unruly things to the citizenship. America seems like the last stronghold where people actually have guns, but America, society-wise, they're not united, so they're turning on each other, which is sad. But we'll keep you posted. If there's anything that you want us to cover news-wise, drop a line in the comments below. Stay on your square. Stay virus-free. If those loved ones you have out there, they don't know that you love them, please let them know. Until next time, peace.
Peace.